Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the opening lecture of Picturing Independence. My name is Jessica Kennedy, and I'm the Educator for Adult Learning and Access for All Program Director here at the museum. The exhibition, Picturing Independence, marks the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and explores how artists have reflected on, interpreted, and shaped ideas of American independence across generations. Featured works were created in this nation and abroad, and in one remarkable case, more than 200,000 miles away from planet Earth. Bringing together these varied perspectives on American identity required the support of many partners, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize those who helped make this exhibition possible. First, I'd like to thank the sponsors of the exhibition, Edward Jones. I also want to thank Missouri Humanities, which during this semi-quincentennial, did I say that right? Great. The semi-quincentennial year is supporting Picturing Independence and many other projects across our state that reflect our nation's history. Finally, I want to thank our members. Their support makes exhibitions like this possible. It also sustains the ongoing care of the museum's collection. That kind of work happens every day behind the scenes and is essential to projects like Picturing Independence. The artworks in Picturing Independence include recent acquisitions and works the museum has owned for many decades. We can enjoy them today because of the commitments made by generations of St. Louisans. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Amy Torbert, SLAM's Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Associate Curator of American Art and the Curator of Picturing Independence. Amy received a master's degree in art history from Williams College and a doctorate in art history from the University of Delaware. Amy joined the museum in 2018 and has since curated and co-curated many exhibitions, including Art Along the Rivers, Art and Imagination in Spanish America, and The Work of Art. I'd like to thank Amy for her passion, expertise, and dedication to the St. Louis Art Museum and for being with us today to share her work. Please join me in welcoming Amy Torbert.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you to all of you for being here inside on such a beautiful day outside and sporting so much red, white, and blue. I love it. Very on theme. So I am so pleased to be able to be here with you today to share a little glimpse and overview of this exhibition, which opened on Friday officially, but runs through the middle of January. So I hope that many of you might have had a chance to go up and see the galleries, or will do so after this overview, but you have a lot of time to come back and dive deeply into these works. So when Jessica reached out to me, I don't know, a couple months ago to say, well, what date might you want to give this opening lecture talk on? I jumped at the chance to present it today on Flag Day because this exhibition, as we will see soon, and you can see here in details of works in the show, features a whole section about depictions of the United States flag. So what more perfect of a way to talk about this? So I thought that for this exhibition overview, I'd start by sharing the story of how the exhibition came to be and a little bit of a behind-the-scenes view of how it developed for our first 10 minutes or so together. And then I'll talk for another 30 minutes, something like that, about individual works and groupings in the exhibition. So let's get started. Last summer, I began to work on this exhibition. As I got started, I first cast a glance about at how our colleagues and peer institutions were planning to commemorate the semi-quincentennial, a word that I've had to work really hard at letting it roll off my tongue so we can all practice this together. Semi-quincentennial, 250th anniversary. And so here is a range of answers to that question of what other people are doing, although it's a far from exhaustive list. It seems like every day I get a new email about another exhibition opening at another museum. But one of the takeaways that I thought of when I was looking and doing this research was that many of our peer institutions were aiming broad and wide to explore the nation's founding ideals and contested histories. So for instance, at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., they have an exhibition up right now that explores how historical and contemporary artists interpreted themes of land, people and community, and freedom, really across the breadth of American art history. I ultimately determined that a slightly narrower set of themes and subjects that really emerged from the strength of SLAM's collection would set us up for the greatest success. And so here is a screenshot of SLAM's collections database showing some of the objects that I first considered. This program, as you might be able to see up there at the top left, is imaginatively called the Museum System. TMS, we spend a lot of time looking at this database as curators. So I started by surveying our collection for all works that related directly to the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, or to politics in the nation's first few decades. And though we have strong selections in these categories, most of which are included in the show, they were not quite numerous enough to fill the exhibition galleries themselves. Although if you know where other objects are that might fit well into that category, I'd be delighted to hear about that. I then widened my search to include works from the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries that related to the history and memory of the Revolution, or to artists' uses of national symbols that had first developed in the 18th century. In studying the results, I realized that our collection was filled with artworks with fascinating stories to tell about how artists have communicated ideas about independence over 250 years. And so the next part of this project was really a curator's favorite part, which was to get to look at the works themselves. And so I'm showing you an image here of one of those study sessions that took place last fall in our print study room, or prints, drawings, and photographs study room. And I just want to say that this is a space that's open to all of you too. So we have a collection of about 17,000 works on paper and photographs, always growing, so that number might be a little low, but just thousands upon thousands of works of art that are all very sensitive to light, which means that they can't be out in the galleries on permanent display, like paintings or works of decorative arts, silver, ceramics, furniture, things like that can be. But you can make an appointment to see any works of any one of those 17,000 works in our print study room anytime you would like by just going to our website. There's a form you fill out, and we would love to bring out any of these highlights for you, right? Drawings by Van Gogh, prints by Rembrandt, you name it, right for you to see. That's my plug for us. But I got to go do this with my colleagues who run this resource, and in doing so, I started looking at the works of art themselves and talking with colleagues whose work depends on managing the safety and security of the works of art, about the feasibility of displaying the group that I had initially put together. And so these conversations helped narrow down the original group of about 90 works of art that I had started looking at to a much more manageable number of 32. So these works come from nearly all of SLAM's curatorial departments. And so I can't thank enough all of my curatorial colleagues for their trust and generosity in allowing me to include so many works from their collections in the exhibition. And that's one of the most special things, I think, about this show, is its real range and breadth across media, across time, and across artists. So, as you can see from these numbers, the show is made up mostly of prints and drawings, followed by decorative arts objects and sculptures, then a handful of photographs, textiles, and paintings. Some of these are staples of our galleries and are frequently on view, so I hope you see some familiar favorites in the show. But others, more than half of the checklist, haven't been shown in decades, and at least 5 are making their SLAM debut. So in terms of chronology, as this pie chart suggests, most of these works come from the 19th and 20th centuries, with a few from the 18th and one from 2017 made by a living artist. And in terms of artist demographics, it was important to me to represent as many different possible perspectives on American independence. And so you see just a few of those kind of art backgrounds of the artists represented here. So, if you've been up to the galleries already, you have a sense of where they're located, but if you haven't, I'm including this map here. So the show is where the yellow box is, so just off of Sculpture Hall. And it will be the first temporary exhibition to return to what is officially known as the Schoenberg Gallery, number 236, where, if you have visited the museum relatively recently, you would recognize that this is where this wonderful sculpture of Pan had recently resided. Don't worry, he has not gone off you for long. He is still visible just kind of around the corner from where he had been for a number of years. For people who have very long memories in the audience, myself included, this is where our temporary exhibition galleries used to be located before we opened our new East building in 2013. So we are returning this space, changing it from permanent collection galleries back to a new exhibition space. And this is the show and project to kick that off, which we're excited about. So we hope that many visitors will enter these galleries off of Sculpture Hall by cutting through our Global Connections Medieval Gallery. But more realistically, we realized that because this gallery currently has 4 open entrances, we couldn't lay out the show in a strictly linear fashion. That is, the sections and groupings had to function as a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure so that visitors could view the show in any order, no matter which entrance they used to enter. So, all of these considerations shaped the exhibition's main ideas, as well as its 4 subsection themes. And so in short, here's the big idea, kind of the takeaway from the show. Picturing Independence brings together artworks that reflect on the history of the United States and symbols that artists have used to celebrate, question, and redefine what it means to be American and for whom. I hope that you will find the exhibition to be imbued with a spirit of curiosity and open-ended exploration, and that it encourages you to question how art reflects the multitude of perspectives and voices that shape the American experience. So for the remainder of the presentation, I'd like to walk us through a speedy tour of the exhibition. For each section, I'll share an overview of its objects in hopes of drawing out connections between them and sharing a bit about the reasons why I chose to include all of these works in the exhibition together. There is much more to say about all of these artworks that are included on view here, but since the galleries will be open after this talk, we've decided not to do a public Q&A. Instead, please hold on to any questions you might have and then come find me either here or up in the galleries where I'll be for a little while. So, in honor of Flag Day, let's begin with this section that is dedicated to considering depictions of the United States flags. These artworks explore how representations of the flag were used to celebrate, protest, and question what it might mean to be American. How do they convey ideas about American identity? These representations by artists do not reject the flag's patriotic meaning by any stretch of the imagination. Rather, they expand it, reminding us that patriotism can also include dissent. So in many ways, Audrey Flack's 4th of July still life, this pretty large print, serves as a guide to this section. Flack has layered symbol upon symbol upon symbol here. She includes a bald eagle, a US flag, a trumpet, a crepe paper streamer, the Liberty Bell, firecrackers, statuettes of a Revolutionary War soldier and Ulysses S. Grant, a print of George Washington, and a tea container. All make up this print. This print comments on the commercialization both of Independence Day and the consumerism of 1976 that accompanied the bicentennial celebrations. And so, let me use this print to introduce this other group of artworks in the show. So it comes from the Kent Bicentennial Portfolio, Spirit of Independence. In 1975, the Lorillard Tobacco Company asked a dozen American artists each to make a print in response to the question, "What does independence mean to me?" And we're seeing the 5 prints out of the resulting 12 that are included in the exhibition. And so we've included these here, so flax print down at the lower left, and then we'll talk about the others as well. We've included these here as invitations to reflect on the varying meanings of independence, then and now. This section on flags includes a few idiosyncratic or personal interpretations by artists. For instance, the self-taught African-American artist Helen LaFrance, here at the left, depicted her memory of a 4th of July parade in her Kentucky hometown. At the right, Flaggedy Ann is an exuberant celebration of tapestry weaving, flag design, and Raggedy Ann dolls made by St. Louis artist Muriel Nezhny Helfman. And Flaggedy Ann is one of the works making its slam debut in this exhibition. Despite having been part of the collection since 1978, we hadn't found just the right context to display this work. But despite her relative obscurity up until now, we're hoping that she may become one of a bit of a mascot for the show, because you will soon be able to purchase her on a t-shirt from our museum shop. I'm sorry that these t-shirts aren't in stock right now. There was a little bit of a delay in their shipment, but we have another 6 months for them to get here while the show is up. And so you could buy Flaggedy Ann on a t-shirt, as well as the second design, which comes from another star of this show, which is this absolutely amazing quilt, which features a US flag and an eagle at its center. So I included this huge blow-up detail from the very center of the flag. There is an inscription on it that is both hard to read in this blow-up and even harder to read in the galleries themselves because it is faded so much. But I can read it to you, having been able to study it with a microscope. And it says, "Presented to E. Morrison by ladies of Baltimore, Maryland, the flag of our Union." Followed by signatures of the 8 friends of Elizabeth Morrison, who was a dressmaker in Baltimore in the 1840s. And so these 8 friends of hers gathered together to make her this quilt. And so let me reassure you that these inscriptions are no easier to read in person than they seem to be here. But that is no reason not to celebrate this quilt itself. So it came from Baltimore, as I had said, where this style of quilt making flourished between 1846 and 1852. Groups of women stitched so-called album quilts to commemorate special events or to honor a prominent community member. Other women chose to be photographed alongside flags, such as the woman at the left who likely served in the Waves, or the women's branch of the Navy Reserve during World War II. Though I doubt we'll ever know the identities of the women in these 2 small photographs at the left and at the center, though I'd love to be proven wrong, I included them in this exhibition in order to consider why they chose to be photographed alongside flags and what meanings the flags might have held for them. They're paired in the exhibition with an iconic image of Buzz Aldrin and the US flag taken during the Apollo 11 moonwalk, which happened on July 20th, 1969. And so, as I hope some of you might have already experienced, the inclusion of this absolutely iconic, important image of American space exploration, this image provided inspiration for our Family Sunday programming today, including a very cool pop-up planetarium, which you can visit, whether you are a young visitor or a not-so-young visitor. You can visit this pop-up planetarium in the Beckman Gallery until 4 p.m. today. But let's look at this photograph for just a second. So because there is no atmosphere on the moon where it was taken, there is of course no wind, or wind doesn't function in exactly the same way it would on Earth. So why does the flag appear to be waving? I love this story. It's because NASA engineers knew that the flag had to appear to be flying proudly and not just kind of hanging limply when Buzz Aldrin placed it in the moon's surface. So, folks back at NASA instructed the astronauts to insert a telescopic pole through the top edge of the flag in order to stretch it out and make it visible both for the millions of visitors watching this moment on TV in 1969 and also for posterity in this photograph. While he was untrained as a photographer, the astronaut Neil Armstrong documented the moonwalk with a specially made Hasselblad camera that attached to his torso on the outside of his spacesuit that could be operated in outer space. And so his photographs, including this one, were selectively released by NASA to those in the scientific community, as well as to friends and family of the aerospace team. And so this photograph was given to us at the museum in 2015 by Ron and Mary Jo Anderson, but Ron Anderson had received it actually in 1969 from a friend of his who had connections to the NASA team. Just awesome. So the flag was claimed as a symbol by groups on opposing sides of many 20th century protests, serving as a reminder of the fundamental democratic rights of speaking and protesting. Hundreds of American flags fly in Gary Winogrand's photograph, taken in May 1970, when protesters for and against the Vietnam War clashed on New York City streets. On the right here, photojournalist Moneta Sleet Jr. Pictured participants in the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. They carry the flags of the United States and the United Nations, aligning their fight for civil rights with the founding ideals of their country. The meanings and uses of the flag as a symbol have expanded through its depiction by artists and individuals. This sentiment is nowhere more true than in these two works by Native American artists that prominently feature flags. On the left here, Fritz Scholder responded to the question, what does independence mean for me, as part of this bicentennial portfolio? So in response, he depicted a Native man wrapped in a US flag. The sitter holds an eagle feather upright, an enduring symbol of indigenous presence, strength, and survival. On the right, the beaded child's vests suggest to me the dangers of oversimplifying such a multifaceted symbol. Flags became particularly widespread motifs in plains art, so art from places like North and South Dakota or Minnesota in the late 19th century, at a time when the US government sought to ban indigenous religious observances. One of the most significant of these was the Sundance, which happened to take place each year in early July. So when faced with this oppression of religious practices by the US government, members of Plains nations who wanted to continue their observances of the Sundance reached out for or found another celebration that took place right at the same time as the Sundance did, and that was the 4th of July. The US government was very happy to have Native men, women, and children gather, at least ostensibly, to celebrate the 4th of July. And so many members of Native nations co-opted those 4th of July ceremonies in order to continue practicing their own traditions in the face of great oppression. And so those became a means of gathering communally and maintaining aspects of some of these practices. So these interpretations by these two Native artists suggest the wide range of associations that the US flag can hold for Native nations and peoples. For some individuals, the flag may symbolize oppression. For others, it can also embody patriotism, especially for the Native American soldiers who have fought for the U.S. military in every war since 1776. A nearby section of the exhibition explores other national symbols. In 1776, the Continental Congress authorized the design of a national seal for the new country. Its main feature was the bald eagle, which quickly became the most pervasive symbol of the new nation. Throughout the 19th century, bald eagles, or just eagles generally, proliferated, especially in decorative arts, where they were carved on gilded on the top of mirrors, like this one that came from upstate New York, or woven into coverlets, like the one on the right here, where depictions of the eagle and the Great Seal of the United States are joined by the word liberty, appearing 16 times, and portraits of a man who kind of maybe looks like George Washington. At least he was labeled George Washington. The eagle could also convey distinct political meanings. Here, so it's funny to see what is the smallest object in the exhibition. It's only 2 inches tall. You could see it in the galleries, and check me on that, blown up here to a great size. So this coffee cup was commissioned by a buyer with the initials WW, which I hope you can kind of make out on the eagle's chest here. We don't know who WW was yet, maybe we never will, but he or she commissioned a set of coffee cups adorned with eagles from a Chinese workshop. And here's a better image of this eagle, which also looks maybe a little bit like a dove, kind of a little bit of both. So once the United States established direct trade with China in 1784, designs that appealed to American taste quickly appeared on the market. In this stylized version of the Great Seal of the United States, an eagle holds both arrows and an olive branch, symbolizing the nation's birth in warfare, but hope for peace. 4 fierce eagles glare out from beneath the handles of this large tureen. Created by Philadelphia silversmiths Fletcher and Gardner, this vessel was presented to Commodore John Rogers by the citizens of Baltimore to commemorate his defeat of the British assault on Fort McHenry in 1814, the very same action that inspired Francis Scott Key to write The Star-Spangled Banner. And made either just before or during the Civil War, the eagle on this final picture likely communicated its owner's support of the Union. And here is a slightly better detail of that eagle. The American Pottery Company, which was located in Peoria, Illinois, was a strong supporter of Abraham Lincoln, the Republican Party, and the Union. This eagle is depicted as a bird of prey, standing defiantly in front of an oak tree, which was another symbol for the United States, protecting his or her young in a nest. Artists also expressed the concept of liberty through artworks featuring both images and words. A pair of posters from World War I reinforces this power of symbols. From an image of the flag used for naval recruiting in St. Louis, here on the left, to a truly apocalyptic vision of a beheaded Statue of Liberty that was used to sell war bonds in 1918, these symbols have wielded enormous power in shaping both collective national histories and individual lives. In 1945, the pop artist Robert Indiana communicated a perhaps more expansive idea of liberty in his contribution to the bicentennial portfolio of prints. He encircled a star and the number 76 with phrases. As he explained, he intended them to be read, starting from the top here, "They chose to be free, free we choose to be." Through the power of the printed word, Indiana hoped to reaffirm the principles of freedom and individuality. So now let's turn back to the section that features the earliest works in the exhibition. The section called Revolution presents artworks that participated in and commented on the American Revolution. A few of these choices may come as no surprise for students of American history. This original engraving, made in 1770, is the oldest artwork in the exhibition. Titled The Boston Massacre, this print was made by patriot silversmith Paul Revere, who depicted a confrontation between British soldiers on the right-hand side and Boston civilians on the left. This was a very successful piece of anti-British propaganda because it cast the Americans as defenseless victims being fired upon by this firing squad. And of course, this wasn't quite exactly an accurate depiction of this event because the Americans were the one who started this skirmish by throwing rocks and snowballs at the British troops who fired, as they claimed, in self-defense. But Revere, who very much supported the American patriot cause, wanted to cast the Americans as defenseless victims. This print was often copied and widely distributed in the early 1770s throughout the original 13 British colonies and helped provide a spark that ignited a revolutionary uproar starting in the 75-76. George Washington also appears in this section in one of the 79 portraits that Rembrandt Peale published of the first president over a period of 40 years. A bust of Benjamin Franklin testifies to European curiosity about the American conflict. From 1776 to 1785, Franklin served as minister to France, representing the newly independent United States. Franklin understood the power of his image and his transformation into a symbol of the emerging nation's struggle and of liberty in general. Jean-Antoine Houdon, the leading portrait sculptor in Paris, suggested Franklin's personality through his facial expression. His mouth is open as if he is just about to speak. And Houdon's suggestion of intellect and warmth in Franklin's animated features reinforces the characteristics that would have aided Franklin's objective to secure much-needed financial assistance from the French. So if the inclusion of these two works is somewhat expected, right? Major figures in the early years of the United States, this next work might be a little bit more mystifying. What does this image of an Old Testament biblical story have to do with the American Revolution? Well, let me tell you. It's American-born artist Benjamin West embedded political meanings within this grand history painting, which he painted in 1775 in London and exhibited at the Royal Academy, the most important annual art exhibition in the British capital, in the spring of 1776. So quite literally, this painting hung in London while the Declaration of Independence was being signed across the pond, across the Atlantic Ocean in Philadelphia. So what are we looking at? West depicts the Babylonian king Belteshazzar, who sits in blue robes at the right there, committing an act of sacrilege by using sacred Jewish vessels during a lavish feast. Belteshazzar's advisors had tried to advise him against doing this, but he did not listen. He went along and used them in this way. During the feast, mysterious writing appeared at the wall which West pictures at the top left here. When this writing appeared, the prophet Daniel was brought forth and interpreted the message to foretell the downfall of the king's empire. And indeed, within hours, that had happened, and Belteshazzar was dead. So, Benjamin West was not wanting King George III to go anywhere. West served as historical painter to the king, a position that came with a hefty annual salary and very complicated feelings, as the country of West's birth and the country of his livelihood were splitting apart. During this period, West's critics saw hints of his repressed patriotism in all the paintings he made during the wartime years, like this one. West did not hope for American independence at all, but he did hope that this painting's story might offer a pointed warning about the downfall of a prideful king, and perhaps give King George III and his ministers a little bit of pause as they approached dealing with their own splitting empire. Still other works in this section speak to military service during the American Revolution and to veterans' lives in the years that followed. Engraved powder horns, like we see on the left here, were an important form of battlefield art. Many were decorated by their owners, like Shadrach Herrick, who engraved this horn, which he used during his service as a private in a militia company in New Hampshire in 1777 and 1778. On the right here, the tankard from Paul Revere tells a more somber story of veteran sacrifices. Brigadier General Timothy Danielson commissioned this vessel following the war as a memorial to his wife and 2 daughters. Beulah, his wife, and his daughters, Sarah and Martha, all died in a smallpox epidemic in 1777, while Danielson was away fighting. In the in the 1850s, artists invoked the memory of the American Revolution in hopes of inspiring unity at a moment of division, as the American Civil War loomed, by recalling the fight for independence. In the print on the left, illustrator F.O.C. Darley imagined a skirmish in 1775 between Massachusetts farmers and British soldiers. And just because it's easy to overlook in the galleries, I wanted to draw your attention to the title and caption of this print. So the title reads, "The First Blow for Liberty, to the Memory of the Patriots of 1775. In April 1775, American Patriot forces repelled the British at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Darley commemorated this event by including 2 lines from Ralph Waldo Emerson's iconic poem that read, "Here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world." Richard Caden Woodville presented a more ambiguous scene, where a young veteran, home from fighting in the Mexican-American War of 1848, confronts an older relative, perhaps skeptical, perhaps simply lost in memories, but himself who is a veteran of the Revolutionary War. And so this young soldier, the one who sits in the middle of the scene here and gestures upwards, is the young 48 veteran who is speaking to his older relative, who the title refers to as Old 76. The room is filled with items relating to the American Revolution, from the bust of General George Washington at the kind of top left center, to the portrait of a Revolutionary War officer, which hangs on the back wall. The portrait's subject sits by the fire, appearing, again, perhaps skeptical, perhaps just lost in memories, as his grandson attempts to connect his own recent wartime service with revolutionary history. This print is based on a painting made in 1849. Woodville intended all aspects of this scene to be interpreted symbolically, including the inclusion of 3 African-American figures who listen at the door in the back right. They act as reminders of the debates over the expansion of slavery, which intensified following the acquisition of so much new territory in the Mexican-American War. And so finally, we've come to the last section of the exhibition. Called Democracy, it presents works that depict the act of voting in order to reinforce the idea that casting a vote is a crucial act of independence. The American Revolution established a new nation and a new form of government based on the principle that power resides with the people. This section is anchored by George Caleb Bingham's painting, The County Election. And if you've been up to SLAM's third floor galleries recently, I promise you that your eyes are not deceiving you. We do indeed own two versions of this painting, both of which will be on view during the run of the show. So the one that we received as a gift into the year 2001 from the Bank of America still hangs upstairs in our third floor galleries. But this version will be down on the second floor, and it's actually Bingham's first version of this iconic scene. So he shows us here a large group of citizens who have gathered to place their votes in an election. A politician himself, Bingham fervently believed that, as he wrote, the will of the people, the supreme law, as the banner reads in this painting, and that the democratic process must be embraced even though uninformed votes could prevail. So he shows us a version of democracy, kind of warts and all. Many of the men who have gathered to vote here seem to be solid citizens, very informed, committing to debating the ideas that they're voting on. But others maybe are less so. Maybe some have had a little bit too much cider to drink, like this fellow here at the left, and the one who is slumped over in the arms of his friend, who is nevertheless being led up to vote himself. The fundamental right to vote is a centerpiece of American democracy and an essential means of civic participation. At the nation's founding, however, more than half of its population was excluded from voting. And we see these exclusions here. Bingham, of course, included no women and only one African-American man who stands at the far left side serving cider. But prints by Jacob Lawrence and the artist Marisol directly address groups who had been prevented from exercising this fundamental right of voting. At the left here, the African-American artist Jacob Lawrence pictures voters standing in line at a busy polling location in New York City's Harlem neighborhood. And on the right, Marisol's print pictures Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, both leaders in the fights to grant women the right to vote and to abolish slavery. And again, both of these prints come from that bicentennial portfolio. So both artists chose these images in answer to the question, what does independence mean to me? Other works in this section are included to assert that multiple perspectives are integral to the democratic process. This idea is suggested by this lithograph on the left, which is made after another political painting by Bingham. So we're looking at this slide here at two very closely related works of art. So the print on the left is included in the exhibition. It is made as a copy of the painting on the right. And so in order to see that painting, you have to go to Kansas City, where it hangs in the Nelson Atkins galleries. But it is similar to this painting, made by the same artist, also as part of his study of the kind of stages of the political process. So this painting is called Canvassing for a Vote, and it can be seen as the first work in Bingham's election series. The composition shows a politician at the right and a trio of potential voters representing the campaign process at work. And wonderfully, the print on the left was given to SLAM by a man named Dr. Oscar Potter, who was a friend of Bingham's. And so Dr. Potter himself appears in the county election. He's the guy on the right here, standing with his hands on his knees, bending over a figure largely agreed to represent Bingham himself. So we have this great direct tie to both George Caleb Bingham's world in Missouri and his friends through this print. And so, what is campaigning if not explaining one's beliefs and hoping to find either commonality among voters or to sway them to your position? And so we finally reached our last exhibition in the show, which is the sole artwork made by a living artist. This artist book invites contemplation along similar lines. It contains 100 different versions of lyrics set to the popular American song, My Country 'Tis of Thee. Between the 18th and 20th centuries, supporters of national causes, from the expansion of voting rights to the abolition of slavery and more, wrote new lyrics to this familiar tune in order to voice their own beliefs. The Chicago-based artist Bethany Collins collected and printed these lyrics and then burned away the unifying musical notes, leaving behind only the differing words. And so I've included this pretty graphic detail of these burned away portions here, just to explain what I mean by that. But this is the spread that you will see upstairs in the exhibition. And so the pages visible there reproduce lyrics seen here, titled A Song of Freedom, dedicated to Frederick Douglass. These were written by a Mrs. W.D.J., that's all we know of her currently, and published in April 1863 in the Boston abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator. And they offer a celebration of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which was issued just a few months before these were published in January 1863. So taken together, this artist book, which is labeled as a whole, America, a Hymnal, is rooted in the idea that there is no single American experience. Instead, it invites reflections on what unites and what divides the nation, what the artist Bethany Collins describes as, quote, a familiar chaos of dissenting versions of what it means to be American bound together. So I hope that this exhibition accomplishes a somewhat similar goal, and that together these works demonstrate that the meanings of American independence are not static, but are reinvented and questioned by each generation. And so with that, let me thank you for your attention and invite you to join me upstairs in the exhibition just off of Sculpture Hall. Thank you so very much, and have a lovely Flag Day.